Right now, there are roughly 3 days of food in the UK, not 3 days stored away in warehouses or government reserves, 3 days actively moving through the system, from farms to processing plants, from distribution centres to supermarket shelves. That's it. Most people in Britain have no idea how tight that margin actually is. They see full shelves and assume there's plenty in the back. There isn't. The system that feeds 67 million people every single day doesn't run on stockpiles, it runs on timing. Walk into any supermarket in the UK and everything looks stable. Shelves are stocked, deliveries are regular, food appears exactly when you expect it. That visible calm has led people to assume that the system is resilient because it's always worked before. Because Britain's food system has reliably fed this country for generations, through good years and bad, silently supporting everyday life without asking to be recognised, it quietly did its job so consistently that most people never had to think about it at all. They believe the food system is strong, not because they've studied it themselves, but because that's the way it's always been. But that assumption is built on an illusion. The confidence people feel didn't come from understanding the system, it came from never needing to question it. Here's what most people don't see. Food in the UK moves in extremely tight windows. From the moment it leaves a farm, it's on a clock. The journey is completely linear and unforgiving. Farms to processing, processing to distribution hubs, hubs to stores, stores to shelves. Each stage depends entirely on the one before it arriving on time, in the right condition, in the right quantity. There's no meaningful pause between these steps, no room for delays, no buffer zones. When something slips at one stage, that delay doesn't stay isolated. It ripples forward through every stage that comes after. This system exists because it's efficient. It reduces waste, lowers costs, and keeps prices stable for consumers. The UK has optimized its food system over decades to be as lean as possible. But efficiency always comes with a trade-off. To move faster, the system had to remove slack. Slack is the extra capacity that allows a system to slow down, adjust, or recover when something unexpected happens. The UK does not operate with a large national food reserve for everyday shopping. Supermarkets are not backed by vast, hidden warehouses stocked for emergencies. What you see on shelves is supported by what's already moving behind the scenes. Stock is turned over rapidly, storage is minimized, timing is tightened. These changes made the system incredibly lean and cost-effective, but they also made it sensitive. When a delay occurs, even a small one, the effects don't remain small. They amplify as they move through the chain because there's nothing to absorb the impact. The entire system runs on one simple expectation: tomorrow's delivery will arrive tomorrow. Because most of the time it does. That expectation becomes habit. Habit becomes confidence, and confidence hides vulnerability. When everything flows smoothly, the system feels invisible. Food appears where it should, when it should, and people stop thinking about how it got there. The handovers, the timing windows, the dependencies that keep food moving all remain hidden. Most people only see the end result, and as long as that result looks the same each day, the underlying structure goes unquestioned. But systems built this tightly don't need to be destroyed to fail. They only need to be disturbed. A sudden delay, a missed handover, a disruption at the wrong point in the chain. When that happens, food doesn't patiently wait for things to recover. It expires, it fails quality checks, it gets diverted to different markets or discarded entirely. Once that happens, the gap moves downstream to the shelves. This is why disruption rarely looks dramatic at first. There are no sudden empty shelves overnight. Instead, the system shows strain in subtle ways. Small gaps appear where products used to be. Certain items go missing from their usual spots. Shoppers get offered substitutes they didn't ask for. Labels quietly change to temporarily unavailable. Expiry dates on products start getting shorter, showing stock is moving more slowly. Quality becomes inconsistent. Each of these looks minor on its own. Most people don't notice or don't think much of it. But together, these small signals indicate the system is operating under pressure. By the time shortages become obvious enough for everyone to notice, the system has already been struggling for some time. Highly optimized systems don't snap all at once. They reveal their limits at the edges first. Fresh food is that edge. It has the least ability to absorb delays or slowdowns. When those disturbances occur, fresh food acts like a warning signal, showing where the system's tolerance ends. Cities make this vulnerability even more pronounced. Urban areas don't produce food, they consume it. That single fact shapes everything about how the British food system behaves under pressure. Cities are designed for movement, not storage. Food is expected to arrive, be sold, and be replaced in a continuous loop. There's very little space for interruption because there was never meant to be any. Unlike rural areas, cities don't have fields to fall back on. They don't have space to store meaningful quantities of food long term. City supermarkets are built to turn stock over quickly, not warehouse it. What's on the shelf today is supported by what's already moving behind the scenes, not by what's sitting in reserve somewhere. This makes cities especially sensitive to disruption. When deliveries slow down, even briefly, the impact appears in urban areas first, not because cities are weaker, but because they're more dependent on constant inflow. Their strength comes from that inflow. Remove it or disturb it, and the system loses balance almost immediately. Highly efficient systems thrive when conditions are stable. They struggle when conditions change suddenly. Urban food systems are optimized for speed and predictability, not for absorbing shocks. When everything runs on schedule, they look seamless. When something knocks that schedule out of alignment, the effects don't spread evenly across the country. They concentrate where dependency is highest. This is why pressure in the system doesn't announce itself in distant fields or warehouses. It shows up where food must arrive every single day without exception. A brief delay, a missed delivery window, or a sudden disturbance can ripple quickly through urban supply chains because there's no buffer to soften the impact. Cities depend on the assumption that food will keep moving. When that assumption is challenged even slightly, the system's sensitivity becomes impossible to ignore. You see it in the shops. You feel it when you can't find what you're looking for. You notice it when your usual items aren't available. Here's what often gets overlooked in all of this. Food doesn't begin in supermarkets. It doesn't begin in distribution centers or processing plants. It begins with farmers. And British farmers aren't just suppliers in the system. They're the very foundation. Remove them, weaken them, or take them for granted, and nothing above them holds. Every loaf of bread, every bottle of milk, every fresh vegetable on a British shelf exists because farmers keep producing without pause, day after day, season after season, year after year. The system is designed around continuity, around the assumption that production never stops. There's no off switch, no pause button. Britain does not store food the way people imagine. The system assumes that tomorrow's food will arrive tomorrow, because until now it always has. Food security isn't about abundance sitting in warehouses, it's about flow. It's about constant production and constant movement. And farmers are the first and most important link in that flow. When people talk about protecting what's on their plates, what they're really talking about is protecting the people who make that flow possible in the first place. Farmers operate on thin margins themselves. They face pressure from retailers, unpredictable weather, rising costs, and policy changes that often don't account for the reality of agricultural production. If the foundation weakens, if farmers can't sustain their operations or choose to leave the industry, the entire structure above them becomes unstable.
You can have the most efficient logistics network in the world, but if there's nothing coming from the farms, none of it matters. The question we should be asking isn't whether food will be available tomorrow. The question is how long a system this precise can survive when the foundation is under pressure. How many small disruptions can it absorb before something bigger gives way? How long can we rely on timing being perfect when the margins for error keep shrinking? Modern food systems are designed for efficiency, not for resilience. In Britain, the priority for decades has been to reduce waste, cut costs, and keep food moving as quickly as possible from source to shelf. When everything runs smoothly, this approach works brilliantly. Food is affordable, widely available, and delivered with remarkable consistency. Consumers benefit from choice and competitive prices. But efficiency without resilience leaves no room for error. A missed delivery window doesn't just affect one store, it affects what follows. Food that arrives late may be rejected because it no longer meets quality standards or timing requirements. Replacements may not align with schedules. Subsequent deliveries are forced to compensate for what didn't arrive. The system begins reacting instead of flowing smoothly. This behavior isn't unique to food. It's how all highly optimized systems operate. They perform exceptionally well under normal conditions and struggle when those conditions change suddenly. They're stable until they aren't, and when they stop being stable, the transition can be surprisingly quick. Minor disruptions can create outsized consequences in systems like this. A road closure that adds an hour to delivery times, a fuel shortage that limits transportation, a cold snap that damages crops, a strike that interrupts key stages of production or distribution. Any of these can create ripple effects that move faster and reach further than people expect. The problem isn't that these disruptions happen, they're inevitable. The problem is that the system has very little capacity to absorb them without showing strain. When systems are built to operate at maximum efficiency with minimal waste, they naturally lose the flexibility needed to handle unexpected events.
Here's the paradox at the center of Britain's food system. When systems work, nobody notices them. When they fail, everyone notices them at once. Success is quiet, failure is sudden. That's why the food system feels invisible for as long as it functions properly. Food arrives when expected, shelves are restocked overnight, prices feel familiar. Nothing appears urgent, so nothing feels fragile. The system does its job without drawing attention to itself, and over time, that reliability creates confidence. People begin to assume that consistency means strength, that repetition means security. But invisibility is not the same as resilience. In fact, the opposite is often true. Systems that run smoothly without interruption are usually finely tuned. They operate within narrow limits. They work not because they can withstand disruption, but because disruption rarely occurs under normal circumstances. Because the system is hidden, its limits are hidden too. Most people never see the handovers, the timing windows, or the dependencies that keep food moving from farm to fork. They only see the end result. As long as that result looks the same each day, the underlying structure goes unquestioned. The complexity remains invisible. The fragility remains invisible. That's what makes disruption so unsettling when it finally appears, not because the system has suddenly become weak, but because it was always operating close to its limits. When something disturbs that balance, the failure feels shocking, precisely because the system was never visible enough for its fragility to be understood in advance. Most people have never thought about where their food comes from beyond the supermarket. They've never considered the journey it takes or the precise timing required to make that journey successful. They've never questioned what would happen if that timing failed. And there's no reason they should have to, as long as the system continues to work. But understanding how the system actually works changes the way you see food in Britain. Supermarket shelves no longer look permanent. Availability no longer feels automatic. You start recognizing that what appears stable on the surface depends on constant coordination underneath. You notice the early warning signs when they appear, the small gaps, the substitutions, the shortened expiry dates. Britain's food system isn't weak, it's precise. That precision is what allows this country to feed millions of people every day with consistency, speed, and efficiency that would have been unimaginable a century ago. The system is a remarkable achievement of logistics, coordination, and agricultural production. But precision systems behave differently from systems built with wide margins. They don't fail dramatically at first, they fail quietly, through small signals that are easy to miss unless you know what to look for. A system can function perfectly for a long time and still have very little tolerance for sudden disturbance. Reliability does not automatically mean resilience. Often it means the opposite. It means the system is operating close to its limits, depending on everything going right, with little room for things to go wrong. Food security is commonly understood as abundance, as if the key question is how much food exists. In reality, food security is about movement. Food only has value to the system if it can arrive where it's needed, when it's needed, and in the condition required. When movement slows or becomes unreliable, availability changes quickly, even if production remains high upstream. This is why the first signs of stress are rarely dramatic. They appear as inconsistencies, gaps in choice, quality fluctuations, shortened availability windows. These aren't isolated issues, they're signals from a system that relies on timing above all else. The takeaway is simple. Britain's food system works because everything moves. Its strength comes from that motion. The shelves stay full because timing holds, because countless handovers happen on schedule every single day, because production, transport, and delivery continue without interruption. The system works not because it's indestructible, but because everything keeps moving. Understanding this isn't about fear or alarm, it's about realism. It's about recognizing that the quiet success of the food system depends on conditions staying aligned. As long as everything keeps moving, the system holds. When it doesn't, the change isn't loud at first, it's subtle, and by the time it becomes obvious to most people, the balance has already shifted. Once you understand how fragile that balance actually is, you start seeing food differently. Not as something guaranteed to be there, but as something maintained through constant work and precise coordination. You start appreciating the farmers who produce it, the logistics networks that move it, and the narrow margins within which the entire system operates. What do you think would happen if that motion stopped for just 48 hours? How would your local area cope? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this deep dive interesting, subscribe for more looks at the systems we depend on but rarely think about.